Good afternoon and welcome to the December 3rd lecture. This is the last lecture of the semester. Holy cow, I can't believe we made it. 30 lectures and this is the last one of the semester. You know what? It's been great having all of you students in my class this semester, and I hope you're ready for your Christmas break. But before we finish up, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about death, the ultimate end, right? So chapter 20 is about death and dying, so I'd like to spend some time today talking to you a little bit about that topic. Okay, if anybody's out there, go ahead and type in the chat bar and tell me hello or send me a remind text. Just let me know you're out there in the world. Good to see you. Hopefully Xiaoyun's out there, maybe Fleming. I don't know if who we've got out there, but hello and welcome to the lecture. All right, let's go ahead and get started if you could. Oh, goodness me. Holy cow. I forgot to change the slide deck. Give me about 2 seconds and I'll get that done. Delete that. Boom, add files. Let's see. So 220. Can't believe I forgot to do that. It's okay though. I've got it set up. And we'll get started right about now. There we go. Okay, Death, Dying, and Grieving, Chapter 20. So we'll talk a little bit about death, dying. Today we'll talk about defining death, some causes of death, the death system, cultural context. We'll talk about a developmental perspective on death, and we'll talk about coping with death. All right? Fantastic. Good to see you. Good to see you. All right. All right. Cultural variations in the death sentence. You know, lots of different cultures think about death different ways. You know, and how I've been, and so. There are different ways to think about death. The ancient Greeks really weren't afraid of death. They were more interested in dying with glory. You know what? Most societies have rituals that deal with death, and most societies don't think of death as the end of existence. Instead, they tend to create some sort of spiritual existence that allows one to continue on after death. The components that comprise the death system, you got people, the family members who are involved in it, where you die. Here in the United States in the 20th century, most people die in hospitals or either will die in hospitals or palliative care centers. We have different objects and symbols that we use to represent death and the transition. And so there's this whole big ritual that accompanies the process of death here in the 20th century. Now, if you remember, we talked about life expectancy in the beginning of the semester, and we mentioned it several times during the course of this semester. Life expectancy in the U.S. has increased a ton since 1900, from an average lifespan of 47 years to 78 years for some people born today. You know, 80% of deaths in the United States do occur in institutions or hospitals. 50% of those die in hospitals, and nearly 20% of Americans die in nursing homes. Right? So, just to remind you, remember I showed you this sheet at the beginning of the semester, and we continue to refer back to it. This is the 10 leading causes of death by age group in the United States for the year 2007. So I'd like to go through this a little bit and look at sort of these patterns of death. If you remember, I talked to you about infancy, and we discovered that in infancy, birth defects, congenital anomalies, if you will, are the most common cause of death, along with SIDS. So these are sort of the causes of death. Now, what you'll notice is that your death is more likely to occur during this first year of life than, frankly, throughout your childhood. It's the most dangerous time of your childhood. Now, if you remember, after you escape that first year, what's likely to kill you? Accidents, accidents, accidents. Be careful. Buckle that seatbelt, look both ways before you cross the street, and don't do anything crazy up on top of a ladder. So you'll notice that it's usually accidents or violent death. So really, it's the first year is the most dangerous biologically, and then after that, really, your life is much safer, and it's all about avoiding those accidents, right? Now, middle and late adulthood, which is where we're in right now, you'll notice that accidents go away and they're replaced by cancer and heart disease. Those are the two things that are going to get you uh, in late adulthood. So the causes of death that occur are usually heart disease is number one, cancer, malignant neoplasms number two, and then you do have accidents, but they've slid all the way to number three since our youth, right? Now, how do we know someone's dead? You know, they talk a lot about brain death because when people sometimes go to hospitals, people may go for accidents or other reasons, and the question is, at what point do you die? At what point do you make that transition from being a living organism to being dead? And they typically talk a lot about brain death. That's the part really that sort of precedes the whole death process. If you think about it, the brain controls your breathing, it controls your heart, it controls everything. So a lot of times it's the brain that starts the process of death. So what do we call brain death? When all electrical activity of the brain has ceased for a specific period of time. How do they tell? They look at your EEG readings, and if they remain flat for a period of time, that might be a criterion of what is death. Now, the brain does include higher cortical functions like thinking, your personality, your sense of self, but it also controls your lower brainstem, your lower biological functions that are controlled in your brainstem, like your breathing and your heart rate. So again, it's the brain sometimes that sort of starts the cascade of death because it stops controlling other biological processes that are very important for you to live. The question is, should just higher cortical functions be considered in determining a brain death? So what if you're laying there and maybe you're not conscious, you're not awake and aware, but your brain is controlling your heart rate, it's controlling your lungs, and you're still physiologically alive, but you're not alive as a functioning, thoughtful human being. At what point do you cross over from being, if you will, alive to dead, right? Now, I remember there was a famous case about a lady named Carrie Schiavo many years ago. She did not have an advance directive, and she suffered sort of what you might call brain death. So her higher cortical functions stopped functioning, and she was flattened out, and her brain activity flattened out. But she still breathed, her heart still beat, and she spent, I think it was 20 years laying in a hospital. Was she alive? Was she dead? She couldn't talk. She couldn't interact with the world, but her heart was still beating. Now, the thing was, her husband and her family members thought it was time to pull her off those machines and let her die. But because she didn't have an advance directive stating exactly what she wanted done in that situation, the hospitals took over and didn't follow the wishes of her family members. And I will tell all of you, you need to have an advance directive so that you can die the way you want to die. And so this is a written statement signed by you that indicates your preference for life-saving procedures at the end of your life. What do you want to do? Do you want them to not try extraordinary means to save your life, or do you want them to pull you off the machine even if you can still stay alive even without extraordinary measures? It's very important that you have this hard discussion with your family members and think about it yourself so that you can decide how it is you are going to die. We all think that death is something that occurs in a very complete, a discrete way. But the thing is, you can be in the hospital and have different levels of consciousness. I remember when my mom passed away, she had COPD, which is the second leading cause of death in her age group. You'll notice that, or the third, chronic low respiratory diseases. She died at 67 from the third leading cause of death. And I remember when she was in the hospital, they were helping her breathe and keeping her heart going, but she wasn't able to talk to anybody, and it was clear that she was not coming back to us. Now, my mom had made it very clear to us what she wanted done in that particular situation. But even then, she didn't have an advance directive. She was one of the 85% of adults that didn't have a living will. And even though we wanted the doctor to save her, the doctor made the choice that it was time to remove the life-sustaining care that they were giving her. Now, this is what my mom had said she wanted to do, but my dad was very much against it. But because she didn't have an advance directive, the medical doctor was allowed to make that choice for her. Please don't let the doctors make the choice that you and your family should make. So you should get yourself an advance directive. Hi, Michaela. It's good to see you coming in. I hope some other people are in the lecture too, but thank you for saying hello. Now, do you support euthanasia, which is the act of voluntarily ending the lives of individuals suffering from incurable diseases or severe disabilities? Some of you are young, so Michaela, you may not even remember this, but there was a fellow named Jack Kevorkian. His nickname was Dr. Death, that worked. He was a retired medical physician, and in the 90s, he got into a lot of trouble because he helped people kill themselves who were suffering from severe chronic disabilities from which they couldn't escape. People who were sick and dying. And he set it up so that he put them in a situation where they could press a button and kill themselves with a lethal cocktail. He engaged in euthanasia, and he actually went to prison for his work because it was seen as unethical and illegal to help another person in their own life. Now, I'm not talking about a healthy 15-year-old or even a healthy 50-year-old, but what about if you're sick? If your level of functioning is so bad, if you have nothing but pain and suffering in the last 6 months, 3 months, year of your life, do you want the ability to end your own life? Now, there are different ways of thinking about euthanasia. You can think about passive euthanasia, which is where you just withhold the treatment. And that's, in a sense, what they kind of did to my mom. They took her off of the respirator, they took the breathing tubes out of her, and they just took away the technologies that were going to extend her life, and they let her die a natural death. And it took about 24 hours for it to happen. Dr. Kevorkian, on the other hand, was engaged in the active euthanasia. He set people up with a button, like I said, and they could press that button and administer a lethal cocktail to kill themselves. So there's different ways you can think about this euthanasia question. Actually, and I've got a picture here of Dr. Kevorkian, and he engaged in what they might call assisted suicide. Our society does not accept this here in America, and Dr. Kevorkian did spend many years in jail before he actually died himself. Now, here's the thing. I hate to say this, but we all have to die. And the question is, how are you going to face this situation when you do die? It's scary. My thoughts of my own mortality scare the hell out of me sometimes, but I do realize intellectually that it's coming. And so what is it that makes a good death, right? If you think about it, the end, dying, leaving this world is not a great thing. But the thing is, you can leave it in such a way so that it's not as traumatic an experience, right? A good death involves being comfortable, not dying in a lot of pain, having your loved ones around, being able to understand and accept this death, and having the appropriate medical care to give you that physical comfort and freedom from pain that most people like. Now, review of articles on a good death suggests it's not really dying that scares most people, but it's the process of dying that really worries most people. And most people report that what they want to do is they want to be in control of how they die. They don't want their doctors to make the choice. They don't want other people to make the choice. They want to have the control to decide how they die. And most people also don't want a super painful death. They want to avoid the pain associated with death. And you know what? They want people around them to make them feel comfortable and relatively emotionally happy while they die. We all have to, but you just don't want to die alone and in a lot of pain. Now, I put a TED Talk in the course resources for you this week about a gentleman talking about palliative care and hospice. So now we do have these places where people go who are dying. They're not hospitals, but they're places that, because hospitals sometimes their job is to extend your life. The job of a hospice is to not to extend your life, but to make the end of your life more comfortable, to create these qualities that lead people to have what we would call a good death. It's a program committed to making life as free from pain, anxiety, and depression as possible. Hospitals emphasize palliative care rather than medical care. Their job is just to reduce your pain and suffering and increase your well-being as you transition during this hard period. If you go back and look at the TED Talk, I like what this gentleman says. He actually says that palliative care isn't just for death. The whole point of life is to live free from pain, free from anxiety, and free from suffering. And he argues that palliative care is something we all should engage in throughout our life. You should do things that give you a sense of well-being. But that becomes even more important during this transition period from life to death. You know, there are more than 1,500 community groups in the United States establishing hospice programs. It's really exploded in the last 30 years. And the goal of these places is just to bring patients' pain under control and help them face death in a psychologically healthy way. Now, most of the patients that you'll find in there are suffering from cancer, sort of this long-term chronic terminal illness. So you'll see lots of cancer patients in these hospice programs. And you know what? A lot of this hospice care, over 90% of this hospice care, is actually can be provided in patients' home. That's the neat thing about hospice care. You don't have to die in an institution away from the things and the people that you love. You can actually die in a circumstance, in the surroundings that make you feel as comfortable and as happy as possible. Okay, now, I told you in webinar the other night that I woke up when I was in my mid-40s. It just terrified me. I woke up in the middle of the night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it hit me. Oh my God, I knew I was going to die, but at that point I realized that my heart could literally stop beating at any moment. You know what I mean? And that the closeness that death came to me that night scared the hell out of me. And for a half an hour I sat up and my heart was beating because it just hit me. It was the most concrete thing. I can't explain it, but for the first time in my life it hit me concretely that I could be here this moment and gone the next moment. You know, that's a psychological realization that I think most people hide from themselves. We all know abstractly that we're going to die, but we don't think about how immediately and close by death really can be. Now, if you remember, we've talked about how people's intellectual abilities develop over the course of a lifespan, and we can think about people's conceptions of death as evolving along with the theory of mind and other kinds of qualities, intellectual qualities that develop over the lifetime. So really, the thing is, some children who are in the pre-operational period, that non-logical but symbolic period of life, you know, it may not really even understand that death is permanent. And they may think that mom or dad or grandpa's gone away, but they'll come back. They may not even understand the irreversibility of death at 2 and 3. But you know what? Around 4 or 5, children begin to understand the irreversibility of death. Now, those kids in early and middle childhood who are concrete operational are going to really understand death in a realistic and concrete way. So there's sort of this transition from the pre-operational to the operational child when they really begin to understand what death represents. It's something permanent. It's the cessation of functions. It's the going away forever. Now, adolescents begin to develop these abstract ideas, and that allows them to do an important thing, to understand that they will one day have to face death. But you know what you'll find? Kids like to tease and avoid it and gloss over it because it's really a hard concept for a teenager to think about, to deal with this death. I remember I had a friend in high school. He was one of a pair of twins, and he had leukemia. And I remember we used to play with him and his twin brother all the time, and we knew that he was sick. We absolutely knew that he was sick and he had this terminal illness. But I remember we used to hang out and play and talk and never really think about what it meant that he had this terminal illness, because we all kind of hid it from ourselves. And I remember when he died, and I was about 14, it was the most shocking thing because we knew it, but we had sort of avoided it intellectually, right? And so this formal operational idea of death still isn't fully formed. Now, death of a parent is extremely difficult for children. When a parent dies and a kid's young, this can affect school performance, peer relations. It's an extremely traumatic event. I remember my mom died at 37, and it felt very traumatic to me to lose her. I could not even imagine what it would be like if I had to lose my mom at the age of 13 or 14. And you know what? With these kids, intervention programs with their caregivers can be very beneficial. In fact, your book talks about a 12-week family bereavement program. I have a niece, her name is Angela, and she's a psychologist, and she works with families whose children are suffering from terminal illnesses. So she works with families of 6 and 7 and 8 and 12-year-old kids who are dying. And her job is to provide the intervention programs that help the families deal with this horrible thing that is occurring to their children. I can't even imagine how my niece has the courage, the fortitude to do this, to deal with families who are losing a child day in and day out. Absolutely breaks my heart. Now, one of the things that's going to happen as you move into middle age, you're going to start thinking about death, and you're going to begin to fear death a little bit more. It starts to come close. You start getting those aches and pains, those chronic illnesses come up. And you know what? So for people like me, getting to the gym, exercise, and doing these activities that help me avoid death are going to be more important to people in middle age than they are to the younger adults, because we're going to start realizing and thinking about this death that is eventually coming for us, and it's going to scare us a little bit more. Older adults think more about death than middle-aged or young adults. You know what? My grandma, who's 100 years old, thinks about death quite a bit. And if you talk to her, she talks about her own mortality all the time. But you know what? The great thing is she doesn't seem to be afraid of it. Instead, she spends her time talking about the meaning of life and how she's lived a good life and all the things she's seen and how much fun she's had and how great the family is. And so what she's trying to do is to sort of give meaning to her life to help her process and feel comfortable about her own impending demise. Now, Nana's still at 101, at 100 and a half years old. She's still not ready to give up. But what I can see in her that I don't have the courage to do it myself is to accept death with a sense of happiness and familiarity. She seems very comfortable with this outcome, and so that's something to think about as you get older and move closer towards that particular event in your life, right? Facing one's own death. You know, I told you some people face death peacefully and then some people don't. One of the things about my dad, unlike my mom, who didn't want to be resuscitated, my dad wants all the help he can possibly get. He told me, Chris, don't you dare give up on me. He's like, I'm not ready to die. And in fact, he likes to joke, please don't tell people I went peacefully. Tell them I went kicking and screaming because I'm still enjoying this life. So, my dad faces death differently than my mom faced death, or maybe my grandma faced death. But one of the things that happens as we begin to face death is we begin to think about the real priorities in our life. Maybe that extra dollar isn't as much as important as going fishing with your child. Maybe getting angry at people isn't worth it anymore because you don't have as much time left. So the knowledge of death, and for me this is true, it helps me establish priorities and structure what it is I think that's important. Right now, I'm not as interested in money anymore. What I want to do is I want to see the world. I want to go to Europe. I want to go to Africa. I want to go to Asia. These are the priorities, and this is how I'm going to spend my money. And this has become more important to me as I've moved through life, as I've gotten older, and seeing people who are older than me die, and the realization of my own mortality has become more important to me. Right? Now, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a very important book where she talked about the stages of dying, and she argued that people go through these 5 different stages of grief when they finally realize that death is imminent. So let's say you go to the doctor and you get that terminal cancer diagnosis, or they tell you that your heart's give out and you only have a couple of months to live. People typically go through a certain set of emotions. Now, according to Kubler-Ross, people go through all 5 of these different stages of dying. First, people deny the reality. Then they get very angry about the dying and feel like it's unfair. She then argued that some people begin negotiating and bargaining, sometimes with a higher power. God, if you let me live, I'll do X, Y, and Z. I remember hearing an important story about Danny Kaye. I think Danny Kaye is the one that established the Shriners Hospitals. He had a near-death experience, and he promised God that if God would spare him, he would set up this hospital. And so from what I understand, the Shriners Hospital was set up as sort of a bargain that Danny Kaye made when he thought he was going to be dying. After the bargaining period, we all realized that you can't escape it. She argued we then go through a period of depression, and then finally we rise out of that depression when we accept our death and develop a sense of peace. This is the only way I can describe Nana. She is at a total sense of peace. And when you talk to her and say, Nana, I'll see you next week, she smiles and says, honey, if I'm still living, right? And you can tell it doesn't bother her one little bit. Now, some people argue, maybe not all of us go through all of these stages. Instead, some people think that some of these are just different reactions that some people have. So some people may have a sense of peace. Some people may have a sense of depression. Some people may deny it. Some people may engage in bargaining. So the question is, do we all go through all 5 of these stages? Or do these just represent 5 different ways of responding to death? Right? Now, death is, we often talk about death not being the worst for the person that dies. You're gone. You don't have anything to worry about now. But people are left behind. And those people have to go through grief, the emotional numbness, separation, anxiety, despair, sadness, and loneliness that accompany the loss of a loved one. And I remember sitting in the parking lot at Wake Tech one day, boo-hooing about a week before my mom died, when it became apparent that she was not coming out of the hospital, that she was not gaining consciousness, and that she was going to die. I remember spending about a half an hour just sitting in my car, just sobbing uncontrollably, because I'd been with this lady. She'd taken care of me. She'd been the one that suckered me. Every time I had fear or something bothered me or something scared me, I could always go to my mom. and she could make me feel better. And I realized that that period of my life was coming to an end. And it caused me to feel very sad, to experience despair and loneliness like I never had before, right? And it caused me to try and make sense of the world. And I came to realize for the first time, I felt like a grown man because I realized that it was on me. She had given me all she could, and it was now me to demonstrate all of the values and qualities that she had trained in me over my 37 years. And it kind of helped me make sense of the world. And honestly, in watching my mom die, I think I developed a little bit of peace towards my own impending mortality that will be coming. You know, I spent a lot of time thinking about days gone by and things that we experienced and events that had preceded, the happy ones and the sad ones. And you know, one of the things that bothered me was my mom died of smoking-related illnesses. She smoked 3 packs a day till the day she died. She just could not stop. And I remember reliving the time about 6 years before her death when she had quit smoking for 6 months. And her turnaround was miraculous in 6 months. And I just felt this sense of shame and grief that we hadn't been able to support my mom in such a way that she had put the cigarettes down for good. I think if she hadn't started back smoking when she was 62, she wouldn't have died at 67. She might have lived another 10 years. I don't know. But I definitely spent time reliving the events that preceded my mom's death. Now, the death's impact on survivors, it depends on the circumstances. For my mom, she was dying for probably 5 years. You know, she kept going in and out of the hospital. The doctors kept saying, Miss Roddenberry, you're going to die. And we knew it. She even talked about it. You know what I mean? So it wasn't a surprise. And so for me and for my dad and for my family, it was easier to deal with. But sudden deaths often bring on intense and prolonged effects on survivors. Somebody dies in a car crash. Somebody has a heart attack that you weren't aware they had heart problems. And you know what? Sometimes people can even develop post-traumatic stress symptoms if they have a loved one that experiences this sudden death, right? And you know, if it's an accident or a disaster, sometimes we have to spend a little more time trying to make sense of it. Why did my friend die in that car accident? Why did that earthquake or that hurricane take out my loved one? I remember when I was a student at Wake Tech almost 35 years ago, I actually took a sociology, a Spanish class, and an intro to business class here at Wake Tech. And I remember that there was a female in my class whose younger sister had been killed by a tornado. It came through Cary, this was about 30 years ago, and hit their house and blew the fireplace down on her sister sleeping in the bedroom. And I remember she had a hard time trying to make sense of this incredible tragedy that had taken her sister's life away. It wasn't as difficult for me because I got to think about my mom's mortality for many years before I actually lost her. I got to have all those conversations that I had wanted to have. But when your sister dies in a catastrophic event like this that's unforeseen, it can be difficult as you try to make sense of why this event happens. Now, typically, people who have to deal with death have to sort of deal with death on 2 levels. So the first thing they have to do is deal with the sadness associated with losing the person, right? My mom's family died fairly young. They all smoked really heavily. My Aunt Carol died of cancer when she was in her 50s. And I remember her husband, Lenny, had to deal with the primary stressors associated with losing his spouse. You know, he was terribly sad. He missed her. He loved her. It was horrible to lose her. Those were the primary stressors that are associated with someone dying. But I remember we went over to see Uncle Lenny at his house about a week after Aunt Carol had died. And what we noticed is that Uncle Lenny he had never learned how to cook. He had grown up in this sort of this patriarchal family where Aunt Carolyn cooked for him, and Uncle Lenny literally didn't know how to do anything to take care of himself. Outside of the grief, he had other problems. He couldn't eat. He didn't know how to clean the house or do his laundry. So these are all sort of, if you will, the restorative functions that he had to learn how to cope with. These were all the secondary stressors that were brought on by death. And so when a loved one dies, sometimes not only do we have to deal with the grief, but we have to deal with the loss of utility that that person provided in our life. And that can sometimes make the grief even more difficult to deal with. Okay, now there are statistics related to losing spouses. It turns out, if you remember, I suggested to you that the average lifespan of males is not as long as females. And so what that's going to suggest to you is that there are more widows than widowers out there. So there are more females whose husbands have died than husbands whose wives have died. And you know, if you look at the age group and percentage of widows, what you're going to find, which makes quite a good deal of sense, as people get older, the number of widowed people increases. 14% of 65 to 70-year-old females are widows. 31% of 75 to 84-year-old females are widows. And 59% of those 85 years old and older are widows. Papa died when he was 83, and Nana was 81. And this was a long time ago. And so Nana has actually been without Papa for the last 19 years. God, sometimes it's hard to imagine. Papa died 19 years ago. But she's had to be a widow for 19 years. Now, Nana's not like this because she's a super smart businesswoman, so Nana's got lots of cash. But widowed women are probably the poorest group in America. Sort of this society historically has been male-dominated, with men making more money, being more likely to do the work in outside of the home. And so what you're going to see is that widowed females are probably the poorest group of Americans that we have, because most of them have lost resources that help support them. And you know what? Many widows are lonely and benefit considerably from social support. You know, one of the things that was good for Nana is that she had a best friend, Bernice, who was the same age. They were both 81 when Papa died. And her and Bernice spoke twice a day until Bernice died last year. So for 18 years, Bernice was the one person, the rock, that Nana could talk to every day. And Bernice provided a lot of social support that I think helped Nana live a happier and better life. Now, Bernice died about a year, and all of us were super, super worried because we didn't know how Nana would deal with the loss of her best friend of 75 years. And so us as a family, one of the things that we try to do is make sure that we're around her, talking to Nana, providing her the social support that she needs to continue living. Cross-cultural studies of widowed men in Europe and widowed men in Europe and U.S., Europe, Korea, and China show that for most people, depression peaks during the first year after the death of your partner, for both males and females. However, widowed women tend to deal with death better, and I think it's because they're more likely to have outside social support, friends, whereas us guys, we tend to put all of our eggs and all of our self-disclosure eggs in the basket of our wife. We don't have anybody to talk to. Men, we're not as likely to build up these big friend networks. And so it's tougher for us to deal with the death of our married or romantic partner. So the widowed women recover to levels compared to married individuals. So their depression goes away after about a year. But widowed men continue to have high levels of depression 6 to 10 years post-widowhood everywhere except in Europe. Now, Mexican American older adults experience a significant increase in depression. And you know what? Being widowed is associated with a 50% increase in having an earlier death, especially for males. Males are much more likely to die within the first year after losing a romantic partner than are females. Okay? You know what? That's all I really had to say today about this sad topic. Don't despair, folks. Yes, we are all going to die, but you know what? You can make your life count until then. Don't forget to eat ice cream whenever you get a chance. Don't forget to stop and smell the roses. Don't forget to go to that concert or that party or have that fun. Right? Yes, we all have to die, but you can make meaning of your life until that occurs. All right, well, you know what? That is about the end of my lecture. That's the end of the semester. I don't have anything else to add. If you need help or have any questions, don't feel free to send me a remind text or an email. Don't forget, the review session is 8 p.m. on Sunday night, and I will be having it in Microsoft Teams, and I'll send that meeting request around tomorrow for everybody. If you don't have any questions, I'll go ahead and say goodbye. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you this semester, and good luck in all of your further academic activities. Take care.